Welcome to this morning's webinar on plant and site layout with me, David Durston. So what we're going to be looking at today is taking an input from a customer, which might be a 2D layout of the plant, taking that 2D layout, adding 3D components to it and geometry to it, joining those items up, adding in some sort of more custom items, and then sort of at the end having a look at ways we can make it look a little bit more impressive for the customer. So first of all, we're going to jump into DraftSite. So this is the DXF file that I've been sent by my customer, which consists of a raised and lowered walkway and the number of different tanks which the customer wants joining together with pipework. So let's go ahead and open this file up in SolidWorks. So first of all, we just say open. We will browse to my desktop and look for DXF files. And we can see here we've got layout. So I'm going to choose to open that. That automatically kicks off the SolidWorks 2D importer. And I'm going to choose to import this as a new part and as a 2D sketch. And then I'm going to say next. And we've got our component here. And then I'm going to say finish. I always have a look at the preview to make sure that I'm going to get the geometry I'm expecting rather than the blank screen, which can happen occasionally if you're importing a drawing view. So we've got our sketch. What I'm going to do is, first of all, make sure my origin matches up. So we'll put that together there, and then I'm happy with that sketch. Now, one thing to check is which plane this has been modelled on. So this has gone onto the front plane. If that's not correct, what I might, for example, this is a layout, I probably want it on the top plane. What we can do is we can edit sketch plane and pick top. And then when we look at the top plane, we've got our component. The origin still lines up in the bottom corner. So if I'm happy with that component, what I can do is I can save that away. And I'm going to save that in my plant layout folder, and I'm going to call that layout. Save that away. Now, obviously, I now want to add additional geometry into my model. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stick this component into an assembly. And we're going to accept that going at the default location. So this has gone in, my origin matches up. I'm on my top plane because obviously it's matched up my planes. If, for example, I hadn't changed this from front to top, then I would have to float this component and remate it so that the planes are in the right orientation. So now I've got my component. What I need to do is I need to start adding in my geometry. So I want to start adding in my tanks. Now, if your customer has given you dimensions for these tanks, you could model these up and insert them as individual models. If your customer is using standardized components, you might be able to download those components from the web or from the manufacturer's website. If you're downloading standardized components, it's a really good idea to add them into your design library for reuse for other customer projects, or potentially the same customer doing an extension to the plant layout. So I've got two T14 tanks, happen to have some T14 tanks in my design library, so I'm going to drag those in. I'm going to put two in because I know I'm going to need both of them. And what we're going to do is, while I'm here, I'm just going to drag in all of my other tanks as well. And then once they're all in, we will look at mating them into position. So there we are, I've got all my tanks in. What I need to do is now I need to start mating them in. Now, because this is on the top plane, it represents the floor. So what I can do is I can make my components directly to my sketch, and I'll know they'll be going to the right place. So if we take the corner of the tank and the corner of the tank foot in my sketch, then what we can do is we can make these together and we essentially position it correctly straight away. I can then come in and have a look at this point and this component. Oh, it would help if I'd pick the point right on the edge. So we'll put those in, come out of the make command, because what I want to do is I want to show you some new functionality for 2014, which is if I select my component, control select the two of them, we get a new fly out with mates here at the bottom, which can make mating everything into place even quicker. And then I need to be able to see this side. Make that in. We're now going to grab our TO1 tank. Make that into position. I seem to have stacked everything on top of myself. We'll drop that tank into position. And then the final tank. And then we're coming back to the top view to make sure everything's in the right place. Now, one of the things I didn't mention that's on this plan view is a rough diagram of where my pipework's going. Obviously, I'd need to have a 3D view of that to see what's going over and under. But now I've put all my tanks in place, what I want to do is just have a very quick check to make sure that all the pipe ends come out of the tanks where there are exits. So these are coming out correctly, this pipe's coming out correctly. But these TO5 tanks, you'll notice I don't have pipes here, but I do have pipes here. So these TO5 tanks clearly need moving around. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into the TO5 tanks and we're going to rotate them. So we need to edit the existing coincident and we're going to remove the vertex and take that point. We're quite happy with that, but what we're going to need to do is also take that point to rotate it through the 90 degrees. So that's our first TO5 tank, and now what we need to do is do the second one, same process. Come back to the top view once more, just to make sure everything looks right. So yeah, we've now got pipes coming out where there are actually exits. And so it looks pretty good. So now we've got all of our components there. We might take this opportunity to save the file. And what we now want to do is we now want to start joining our tanks up. So to do this, we use the routing command. Now, as yet, I don't have routing elements ready to come out of my tanks. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to come in and actually add flanges to the ends of these tanks in order to start the routing off. But if you're using these tanks regularly, you're always going to have flanges of the same type, be they welder flanges or bolted flanges. Then you could either add them in and have them as sub-assemblies or add connection points directly to the ends of the tank, so you don't have to do this next step every time. But for me, I'm going to very quickly drop that on there. We're going to pre-selected the configuration that matches my diameter of hole, and it's then going to start a route. So I'm going to accept that route with pipe 1. And what we're going to do is I'm going to add on another flange here. I'm just going to add the 1 at this point, and we're going to come to the routing and we're going to auto route. And we can just choose to auto route between the 2 points, and then I can choose to drag this, again coming back to the top view. And we can see that where the customer has sketched the line in and where I've got it don't match. So we can just drag this around so that they line up. Now, at the moment, I don't have any dimensions. I could go and measure the 2D sketch, for example, if I need it to be precise. But with this level of sketch, you can assume some element of guesstimation in their drawing because we haven't got as much detail as we would need for everything else. So I'm going to drag that up so it lines up with the sketch. we now need to continue this, and what we're going to do is we're going to start joining up my tanks to these two T07 tanks over here. So first things first, we'll come in, we'll add some more weld flanges, one on there. We're quite happy with that size. Another one on the bottom of my first T07 tank. There we go. Again, it's just going to double check the size with me. And a third one to the bottom of my last T07 tank. There we go. And again, just confirming the size with me. So now I've got those elements in, we need to join them up. Now, the first thing I need to be aware of is that these are exiting very close to the floor. So if I just come through and I auto route, the chances are those are going to go through the floor. I wanted to predefine how high those are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly add in some sketch geometry, which I can then add some definition to as a way of guaranteeing my height's going to be correct. So we'll bring that across to there. And we'll bring that one across this way as well. Oh, it'd help if I did a single click in the first case. So now I've got those two elements of pipe. What I'm going to do is I need to just reference them up so they all end up in the same location. So we're going to take these two endpoints and we're going to say that they are along Z, so that they're going to be in line, both in the Y and in the X. And then finally what we're going to do is we're going to add in the dimension on this down section, and we're going to make that 250. And this just guarantees that my pipe work is going to be off the floor. So you can see there we've now got a little bit of clearance off the floor, and I can change this dimension if I need to move things up and down at a later date. So we now need to join that in. Obviously I'm going to need some T sections in order to join these on, so we can grab this straight T, we can add it onto the end of the pipe, we can use the tab key to turn it around if the orientation is incorrect. Again, we get a check whether everything's going in the right direction, and again we'll pop one on there. And then what I can do is very quickly we can join these two pipes together, and you can see everything's moving as a group. And if I come back to my top view, we can then drag that so that it's lining up with the sketch. Actually, I was pretty close already. That's pretty good. For tidiness' sake, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this element and say remove pipe, and what that does is it turns it from two root segments to one root segment along there. So now I'm in the top view, I'm going to need to join these two up. Now before I do that, we can see there needs to be a T here coming off towards my second T14 tank, and we can also see there's a route coming over this section here. So there's obviously a route that goes up and over the top of my T14 or down underneath. So I'm going to need another T in this region to come up and round and over the top. So let's have a look at working on some of those. So first things first, we'll drop that T in. We know there's going to have to be one on the end to go up and over the top, so we'll add that T in. And then if it's coming over the top and joining in down this end, we're going to need a T over here as well, so we'll drop that in. And now that last one's in, what we can do is start to use auto route again. So we'll auto route between these 2 points, and because we don't know exactly the height we're going to get it, all we're going to do is make sure it's clear of the tank at this point. Again, if there is some additional information the customer sent you, you could use that to set the height. We're now going to auto route between our components over here. And in this case, it gives us something which clearly doesn't follow our line. So we're going to select a different orientation. That one looks pretty good, actually. It's certainly following our curve, so we'll go with that. And we'll accept that. So our route now comes all the way around. The last section we've got to do is leave the building here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add some sketch geometry. Comes along, make sure you're going in the right plane, because otherwise everything will get a bit untidy. And we'll come out that way. So I've now got my sketch geometry over here. I don't know exactly how this is going to leave the building. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my sketch geometry over to there, and I'm just going to stick a flange on the end of it. Apologies, that's just because I dropped it on top of another point and wanted to add some other information in. So we'll just drop that on the end of the route. And again, it's just going to confirm the size that we want to use. So what I've done is drag that in and say there's the wall, and you can see the reason now I picked the height I wanted, because my flange that leaves in the building is not through the floor, neither are my pipes for that matter. So very quickly you can see we've got our routing in, and obviously this would continue to the other tanks and potentially with other sizes as well. I'm not going to do all of that now because it's not hugely interesting for you guys to watch. So we leave the sketch for the routing, and we also leave the component, and we've got all our routing done. So the next thing to have a look at is this raised walkway. To do the raised walkway, the easiest thing is to have another component for it, and because it's a walkway, it's going to be some sort of welded structure. So we want to start looking at doing 3D sketches as well. So the quickest way for me to get the walkway in the right position is to create a plane and then do my sketching from that plane. Now, hopefully the customers told you where or what height they want the walkway to be at. If they haven't, the chances are what you're going to do is you're going to put it in, have a look at it and say, that looks all right, it's not going to hit any of my pipe work. I know I'm not coming far enough across to clash with this, so we should be fine at that height. Now I've got that, what I want to do is insert a new component. And when I'm asked, I want to put it on plane 1. So what that's going to do is it's going to create me a component on plane 1, in context component. It's also going to create a sketch on the front plane being plane 1 that I've just selected here. So what I'm going to do for this sketch is, rather than redraw everything myself, I'm going to start the Convert Entities tool, and I'm going to select the existing sketch geometry. You may notice that I've left some gaps. In this case, it's because what I'm going to do is extend the lines that are that I did select and just join them up. And this means that I end up with single line segments, which makes life a lot easier when we come to look at putting weldments and things along it. I also need to drag back the overextended lines. I could equally use the trim command. So that's my sketch for the outline. What I'm going to do is I'm going to exit that sketch. I'm going to use that sketch a little bit later to create the flooring to my walkway. But what we're going to do now is start looking at the 3D sketch, which is going to be for my weldment. So I'm going to take the sketch I've just done and convert it. Lovely. And then we're going to start adding in some additional geometry, which would be necessary for our welded frame. Now, at this point, I'm going to confess to a little bit of time saving. I'm not going to put all of these lines in again because it's not particularly interesting for you to watch, but presumably there would be other dividers along this section and likewise along this section to support your floor. But for speed, I'm going to skip those. So now I've got everything in, which would be my horizontal level. I need to start putting the legs of my welded frame in. So again, we start the line. We want to make sure we're in the right plane. So rather than XY, we want something with a Z. And we start adding the legs in. Now, a lot of these legs will go straight down to existing points on my lower sketch, which makes it nice and easy to position them. I don't want that one. If they don't, then you just need to be careful to make sure that you are actually going along the axis. So when I come to here, you'll note that I'm going along Z. Again, it helps if I don't double click. That up. Another point of note is when you've got a lot of the routing geometry around, you do need to be somewhat careful not to accidentally select that instead of the base sketch. Here being a classic example. So with my 3D sketch done, what I can then do is start looking at the weldment frame. So we're going to do a structural member. We're going to choose some square tube and 20 by 20, and we can do this in very simple groups. Oh no, not that one, that one. Unselected that one, that was careless. So we've got those. You may have noticed that in group 1 I missed that edge, so we'll just drop that in now. And my final group is going to be my legs, so we will just select these. And then we can accept the structural member. And we've got our frame in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the previous sketch I had, and we're going to create a extruded boss base with it, and we need it to be 3 mil. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to offset it by half the thickness of my weldment, just so it sits up on the top, and hit the tick. So you can see pretty quickly I can get my structural member, and that in order to create a sketch for that. And then now I'm finished, what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit the feature. So very quickly you can see that I can get a plant down. Now the next thing to do is start making it look a little bit more attractive. So the first thing we could do is add in some ground, a floor for the customer to see. Now here's a floor I made earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very quickly mate up the origins of my floor to my assembly, just to put it in the right place. And you can see straight away that starts to make things look a little bit more realistic. Now, something the customer might ask for is for the walkways to actually be modelled into our assembly, so we can see them here. So we can start to put in a model which represents our floor. If I now hide the layout sketch, because we don't need that anymore because we've added everything in, minus the stairs obviously, we very quickly start to see this starts to look like a real building. We've got our other sketches visible from our weldment and our routing. Now, something the customer might ask for might be some walls, so we can equally model those in. And again, it now starts to look a lot more realistic, much easier for the customer to understand how it's going to work in his building. Now, brick walls might be relatively rare for large industrial buildings nowadays, so what we can do is, if we hide those away, there is a tool called grid. So we're going to add a grid system, and so this is on the insert reference geometry grid system. By default, this adds the grid system to the top plane. So before actually clicking this, I'm going to come back out and I'm going to choose my right plane before I go ahead and insert my grid system. So we're now sketching onto the right plane, and I'm just going to very quickly throw a sketch on here to represent the shape of my structure. Now, in this case, I'm going to want a number of these structures as they go across. We're going to choose 6 700s as a gap, and I'm going to choose 4 in total, so my original one plus another 3, and then we're going to hit the tick. And what this does is this brings the structure across, and you can see how this could potentially continue on for several buildings. Now, why would you use a grid structure rather than drawing it yourself many times or doing a pattern of features? Well, the grid system is a very easy way for somebody to define how a building is laid out, and enables you and the architect and the customer, who may all be working in different software packages, to use the same grid system and keep things up to date, because you can come back in and edit these. Now these sketches are here, however, what we can do is start to add a weldment along them. So again, come back into weldments, structural member, and we're going to choose some slightly heftier box this time. And what we're going to do is do a selection with a group for each arch, and I'm just going to add the weldment to the 3 which are actually part of my building, rather than the 4th one, which is a demonstration. And then, oh no, I don't need group 4, I just said that. So we straight away get those across. Now, again, like I said, what's the difference with the pattern? Well, actually, the grid system gives us a 3D sketch which represents the longitudinal joins. So this enables us to put a structural member through those, which is going to be of a different size. So let's choose a pipe, for example, and this way we can have a group for each longitudinal as well. So this is starting to do some of the 3D modelling for us without us having to worry about putting these elements in. So if you feel that looks a little bit more realistic for your customer's structure than brick walls, then you can also use the grid system. So what we've very quickly covered is bringing in a 2D drawing and using that to place components that you've already got onto the model. We've then looked at using the routing pipework to join these items together, how to add in additional sort of more customized items, for example our raised walkway, and then how to make sort of set the scene for the customer, make things look a little bit more realistic with floors, diagrams and paintwork that could potentially be on the floor, and walls of one form or another, and also using the grid system. Now you might ask, what happens when the customer, as inevitably they will, comes back and says, but I want to make a change? Well, because everything is mated to your original sketch, if the customer does decide to make a change, you can just come back in and edit the sketch for the layout and drag things around. So for example, if we make this walkway longer, or if we make it wider, this walkway longer, or even if we start to move the component or the points that make up the representation for our tank, I'm just going to very quickly drag that point on its own. When we exit the sketch, our assembly will rebuild. So my walkway has got bigger, my tank has moved, so there's now a gap between the tanks, and my walkway over here has become longer. So it's very easy for you to then make changes as the customer changes their mind in order to keep up without having to do a lot of remodeling. So thank you very much for watching. Some webinars that are coming up in the future. 19th of December next week, Electronic Enclosures Part 2. That's our last one for the year. And then we've got 9th of January is Electronic Enclosures Part 2. Both of those are going to be with Ed. And then on the 16th of January, we've got sheet metal. Thank you very much for watching.